Hi everyone, welcome back to Creatively Crafted Life. This is Melanie, and today is the next installment in our organization prep for 2021. I hope you're joining me in doing these little exercises as a way to prepare for what we're going to tackle next year. So today we're going to talk about what our current organization situation is and what's working and what's not working. So we're thinking about things like, what systems do we currently have in place? Do they make sense? What have I tried, or what have you tried in the past that hasn't worked? Are you a flipper versus a stacker? Or do you like to dig through a pile of things, or do you like to have stuff micromanaged? Are you someone who prefers things hidden away, or do you like things out in the open? Do you find lots of options overwhelming, and perhaps you prefer to have limited options available? Does the way something look impact your happiness with your craft room? So in other words, are you function over form, or does it have to be both? When answering all of these questions, think about what you've done in the past that has worked, and think about why it worked for you. What element of that system was the thing that checked your box as this is something that works for me? Hopefully that makes sense. Think about your current organization tools. For instance, are you using bins? Are you using carts? Are you using hangers? What about drawer units? Binders, bookshelves, cube shelves, over-the-door racks, bars. Those are all things that I'm currently using in my craft room. What are you using in yours? Is there a particular thing that you are currently using that you don't like? So for instance, I find cube shelves to be quite challenging. I find it very hard to maximize the full cube, but I have three 2x4 cubes, and I have one 1x4. And this was something that I thought about long and hard. How can I make this work? And I actually found something that allowed me to add an extra shelf in there to maximize space, and now I love them. But it did bother me for the longest period of time, and I was tempted to get rid of them. So if there is something in your craft room that isn't working, or that irritates you, or whatever feeling evokes in you, is there something you can do to make it work better? What is that? What do you think that it could be? You don't have to have a solution, right? You don't have to know that you can go and buy this thing. Just at this point, think about what would make this work better for you. And all of these things you can document in your little book if you're doing so. I do find writing things down helps me formulate my thoughts, but that's the way that I work. Perhaps you have a different way of doing these things. So I did two spreads for this one. I actually came up with one that says what systems are working for me and what systems are not. So what's currently working for me, I love my punch storage system. I haven't featured it very much because I haven't had to change it very much. And it's basically IKEA bars. I think they were towel bars or something like that. I don't think you can get them anymore, but I just mounted them on a piece of wood, and I just stack my punches over top of the bars. It works wonderfully. When that maxed out, I added an over-the-door bin system to the door into my craft room, and I have punches stored there as well, and that has worked really, really well. I absolutely love that system. My stamp storage is basically modeled after Jennifer McGuire's system of using envelopes and bins. I use the divided interdesigned fridge bins that hold stamps on both sides. I use a combination of pockets as well as DVD cases, and I put those in my Calyx units that I talked about earlier. I'm also pretty happy with my bookshelves. I have purchased a number of bins that fit within those shelves, and I think I have maximized that space as well. I've also gone back to IKEA and purchased additional shelves just to make sure I could configure it so that every inch of that unit is utilized. Things that aren't working so much. The carts, I continue to struggle with them, especially the Raskog carts. I'm not a huge fan of the second and third tier, which kind of defeats the point if I'm only using one. So I do need to revisit that some more. I love the Alex drawers, and I had a pretty good system in them, but I started to expand outside of my current system, and I took everything out, and now those drawers are a bit of a mess, so they do need to be tweaked. Plus, I use the Alex drawers for storing distress colors, and it worked great until Tim Holtz decided to throw in some more colors. And of course, I will be purchasing them because I have no restraint. So I'll need to reconfigure that to make that work. My closet's pretty good. I'm pretty happy with that for the most part, although the upper shelf, because I did some switching around with my memorabilia, that shelf is not being utilized as much as it could be. I also have a hanging shelf in there with a couple cubes that could use some tweaking. I'm also not completely sold on my mixed media storage. I have moved this stuff a number of times throughout my craft room. Right now, most of it is currently sitting in one of the Raskog carts, and I'm still not entirely convinced that that is its final resting place. I mentioned this in my first video that I have a section where I store my cutting mats and rulers, and it's stacked. And I don't do stacking. Well, I just don't. It's very hard for me to put things back in there in a way that works. It's a perfect spot for it. It's out of the way, it's flat, it's enough space, but it's just not working. So I need to rethink about that. And then the other thing that I want to kind of tweak is some of my decor. Some of the shelves are feeling a little bit overly cluttered, I know, even for me, if that's possible. So I think I can improve upon that. So that's the first spread. The second spread is talking about a functional system, a functional organization system. And this is going to be different for everybody, and you really need to be honest with yourself. So it's very appealing to look at someone's beautiful craft room that's in these magazines and be very impressed with how pretty it is. And trust me, I've been there. And you want it for yourself, and so you start modeling it after yourself. But it requires a different level of effort than perhaps you're prepared to put into it, or it requires way more money than you're prepared to put into it. Or the other thing is it just doesn't work. So while I think it's aesthetically pleasing to see everything behind closed doors, I know myself, if it's behind a closed door, I will not use it. Just the way it is. I've tried and I've failed. I've been there and I've done that. So I just wrote out some of the things for me that define a functional system that will work for the way that my brain works and the way that I like to organize things. Easy access is at the top because for me this is absolutely critical for me to maintain this. If it becomes too difficult, and I'm going to tell you right now, too difficult is not very hard to achieve because I don't want to say lazy, but I don't like to do more than I absolutely have to. So easy access is absolutely the most critical. So something like having to open a door, having to pull out a bin, to reach a bin behind that bin is not going to work for me. I can tell you right now that bin will come out, I will use it, but knowing that I have to open the door and pull out the bin to put the other bin back in the drawer or the cupboard or the shelf or whatever is just not going to work. And that thing that I pulled out will now sit on the floor. And it will sit on the floor for a very long time until one day I trip over it or something like that, and I will then finally deal with it. For me, easy access by far is the most critical thing for a functional system for me. No stacking. I've already mentioned this before. If I have to pull something off, very similar to easy access, if I have to pull something off to pull something out and then put it back, it's not going to happen. It's going to become a jumbled mess, right? It's going to get all wobbly and uneven, and I'm probably never going to put it back in the place where it needed to go. So no stacking unless it makes sense. So I do have one other area in my craft room where I do stack, and that is in my stamp storage. I added some shelves, and in there I have placed my paper pads for mixed media, watercolor, that kind of thing. Because I don't access those constantly, and I don't really care if they're in a particular order, I can pull out and put on top, and it's pretty easy. So that works in that particular case. I love bins. bins are my go-to thing. I like being able to take something from a shelf, putting it on my desk, using it, put whatever I'm using back in the bin and then back on the shelf. Again, this ties in with easy access. It's very easy to manage, very easy to move to where I need it to go, and very easy to put back. But there is a but with bins. They can't be too big. In other words, the bin has to fit the size of the item. So you could have a 12-inch bin that fits in your Calyx unit, but throwing pens in that bin is not going to work for me because they will just get lost in the bottom and it would be big chaos, right? I need a bin or a container that will store those items in a way that contains them, right? And makes it easy to move. So that's just something to keep in mind. Not all bins work for all products. Pick the right bin for the right product. I hope that makes sense. I put down clear and visible. So clear bins work really great for me. Anything visible works. So you could have a solid bin, but let's say you have the item peeking out over the top. As long as I can see what's in the bin, that helps. Of course, you can label bins. I'm not really good at reading the labels. I put them on everything, but by and far I go visually. So I know that, for instance, on my bookshelf, I can see exactly which bins have washi tape on them. I don't need to see that the label says washi tape. In fact, it's almost redundant to put the label on there. I just do it because I think it looks cool. So clear and visible are important to me. Now, for someone who doesn't like visual clutter, clear and visible is not going to be a functional system because that might overwhelm you and actually will detract you or discourage you from crafting, right? So what works for me may not work for you. I need a home for everything. If I have an item in my room that is homeless, it moves around the craft room. So one day it will be on top of the printer, but I need the printer. So then that homeless item now moves to the other printer. Then I need that printer and that homeless item now moves to my desk. You get the idea. It shifts constantly and I spend a lot of time moving this item, whereas if it had a home, I could just deal with it, put it back where it needed to go and be done with it. So everything needs to have a home. It becomes a problem to find a home when your room starts to max out, and that's where I'm at. So I'm going to have to make a few decisions about either getting rid of stuff or deciding whether or not that homeless item needs to be in the craft room. Another thing that I utilize quite a bit is to minimize packaging. So when I bring stuff into the craft room, almost all of the time it doesn't remain in the original packaging that it came in. Now there is an additional cost for this, and so this will not work for everyone, and I'm sure some of you have some great ideas to get around some of the issues I have with packaging. If so, make sure you leave them down below so we can all learn. So I'm going to see, let me see if I can find something. Okay. So here's an example. Your instinct is to open this up from the bottom, and what ends up happening is there's some sticky adhesive on this, and when you pull this out it gets stuck, right? It gets stuck. That bothers me a lot. So that is one thing that I find annoying about packaging. Now I know, and this is what I will do if I'm going to keep the packaging for some reason, is I will come in and instead of opening it from the bottom, I will trim this off at the top. And I will just trim that off like so. Now there's no adhesive to deal with and I can slide this in and out very easily. Okay, so something to keep in mind. Another reason why I do like to cut the top off is because now this is not flapping in the wind. And we have and now this looks neat and tidy. Here's the problem though. If this is gonna go in my sticker bin, it's going to get lost because it's too small relative to all the other items in this bin. And so one of the reasons why I like to repackage things is so that they are a uniform size. So let me show you another thing that I've done that exhibits this. So many of you have seen my enamel dot organization. I basically take all the enamel dots, I trim them down and attach them to a card like so. And the reason why I do that is because they come in all different size and packages, which makes it very difficult to find and flip through things easily. Enamel dots also come usually with 4 or 5 different colors on them. So if I wanted a particular shade of pink, where do I find it? I may have it filed under pink, maybe under blue, maybe under black, depending on what the enamel dots are. Whereas this way I can easily flip. Remember, I'm a flipper, not a digger or a stacker. I can flip through, find, oh, here's the right shade of green right there, and it's really easy and simple to put back in. I'm not dealing with packages that I have to slide things in and out, right? I don't have to peel this off, or in this case, I cut this off the top. I don't have to peel this back and forth, try and jam it back in when I'm finished. The color is really easy to find. All win-wins in my book. The other reason why I repackage things like stamps is because the quality of the packaging that you get the item in is meant for shipping purposes. It's not necessarily meant for long-term purposes. So that is another reason why I just find it functions better. Usually has a little bit more wiggle room in it so that it's easier to slide things in and out. I don't have to worry about it ripping so quickly. And again, it's that consistent size that allows me to store it easily and quickly. So for me, I try to keep things as uniform in size as possible, but every now and then manufacturers throw a monkey wrench in and come out with a new stamp size. I just, I adapt, but I prefer things to be uniform size where possible. And I really try to watch the expense on this. I do know that this can be expensive. And so if cost is a factor, by all means, keep them in the packaging. Just maybe take off the top, don't use the bottom, and hopefully that will work for you. I also need to have solutions in place for things like purchases, my scraps, pulled supplies, and systems for purging items. Now, I'm not saying I have all of these in place right now or that they're all working properly, but I know for a functional system for me, I need to have solutions for these. I don't really have a great solution for purchases coming in. I do inventory most of the stuff that comes in that's a tool. And so I do have a process for that, but I don't typically do that immediately as soon as I buy something. I tend to let a few things accumulate and then I deal with it. So I need a system for that. I don't keep very many scraps anymore. Last year, I think it was last year, about a year ago, I went through my scraps, used up a bunch, got rid of a bunch, and now my motto is when I finish a project, I try and use those scraps immediately, either making a base page or card bases or an actual card so that I don't keep a ton of small scraps around. And that's been working out pretty good so far. But I do keep a bin beside my desk, and when I'm finished a project, any paper items go in there, and periodically I will go through that and purge and or do something with it. I don't really have a system for purging. I think the last time I did a really big purge was over a year ago. I'm not at the point where I feel like I need to do a big systematic purge, but I really should have a place so that when I come across something that I no longer want or would like to keep in my craft room, that I can store it until I'm ready to move it out. I talked already before that I love to flip. I'm not a stacker or a digger. So my systems need to accommodate being able to flip things, which ties in really well with bins. And for me, function is more important than form, meaning I need a box or a bin or a tool that works for that tool, and it doesn't have to be pretty. So I will forego something looking pretty in order to make sure that it works in my system. Now, if it happens to be pretty and functional, win-win. Okay, so that is where I'm going to leave you guys today. Challenge you to think about your current systems, what's working, what's not working. And if you were to explain to someone who doesn't know you what a functional system looks like for you in your craft room, in other words, what things do you want or do you need in your craft room to make it work properly for you? List those out so that you have a clear picture of where you are heading. Really, this is going to be a roadmap to help us get to where we want to go. I'd love to hear what items make up your functional system. Be sure to leave a comment below listing you know, listing at least 1 or 2 of them. I'd love to hear. And I'm sure others may be interested, especially because we all have different organizational styles, so we can all learn from each other. Thanks again, everyone, and until next time, happy crafting and happy organizing.